Introduction. Under the COVID pandemic, stakes have never been higher in terms of public opinion of decision makers, as the relationship between effective leadership and public welfare is exposed at its most fundamental level. The process and quality of decision making are also under acute and daily scrutiny. In highly mediatised contemporary political contexts, characterised by populism and machismo, leadership discourses have become increasingly polarised, and this is especially notable in their gendered essentialism. In the UK, we've seen a mobilisation of wartime discourse and an aspiration towards a Churchillian stature adopted by Boris Johnson, drawing on macho and nationalist tropes that we saw at their apotheosis on the recent anniversary of VE Day. However, fear, uncertainty and the visible failures of many nations' responses to the pandemic have given rise to an alternative set of discourses, those associated with expertise, with care and social responsibility. Leadership in the popular imaginary is based on the values of masculinity, including masculine definitions of femininity. We can see these values in discourses of the heroic, strong individual male, and more usually associated with the female, the complementary, empathetic, communicative leader. We can see these in campaigns that exhort companies to appoint more women to boards and governments to expand female representation because they allegedly bring a new spectrum of competencies and behaviours, different but allegedly, i.e. not really, equal. Now, Hannah and I have been particularly interested in the emergence of popular gendered understandings of leadership during the pandemic, because the pandemic happens to coincide with our current research project into girls' perspectives on leadership and women in the public eye. And we found very interestingly that girls' perceptions and preferences speak in very particular ways to patterns emerging in online and popular media in their new representations of women leaders. So in today's seminar, Hannah will explore some popular performances of masculinity and ways in which these are being exposed and challenged via social media. And I will then go on to look at some of the leadership models coded as feminised currently being lauded, especially those coalescing around New Zealand's Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern. I'll then draw attention to ways in which these resonate with the views of our teen girl research subjects, which are easy to dismiss as utopian, which offer a sense of the social hopes of the next generation, for what Richard Rorty calls the shared knowledge of what is already real being replaced with the shared hope for what might become real. Okay, over to Hannah.
Thank you. Sorry, so Michelle, I thought you were talking about Jacinda first.
Oh, sorry, I can. So this is how many emails have we exchanged on this? Not enough, right? Yeah. I'll go straight on with Jacinda. I'll go back to sharing. Sorry, Hannah. So the pandemic isn't the first global crisis in which we've seen calls for more female leadership. The 2008 global economic crash saw a demand for more ethical, careful and connected forms of leadership to avert future disasters of a similar nature. These forms are, as I've said, popularly gendered as female, as for example in the Lehman Sisters hypothesis, which states that had the Lehman brothers been Lehman sisters, the crash wouldn't have happened at all because women are fundamentally more ethical. Both political and corporate discourses have a tendency in crisis to coalesce around women and girls as these kind of potential leaders who can deliver a safer future for us. And this isn't to say that women leaders are no longer represented in diminishing, demeaning and stereotyped ways. A pandemic iteration of the infamous Legsit headline, for example, could be Lord Dunning's obsession with whether Nicola Sturgeon is getting a haircut professionally during lockdown. Under the pandemic, though, we see a set of discourses associated very particularly with women's leadership. While those of their empathy and care emerge strongly, so do those associated with collective and consultative decision-making, evidence-based risk and social responsibility. So the examples I've put up show some of the discussion that's taking place on Twitter, which you can see the kind of essentialized discourses emerging, but also the valuing of these other forms. And it's particularly those associated with clips and quotes and memes of New Zealand's PM Jacinda Ardern. Qualities associated with her do resonate with gendered essentialist models. As we can see, she's been praised for accessibility and warmth, for her reassurance and empathy, and especially via her more informal Facebook sessions. In this way, she fits comfortably into popular views of the good national female leader. She's known in New Zealand as Auntie Cindy. So qualities associated with her do resonate, as I've said, with these gendered essentialist models. And in this way, she does fit into this kind of the idea of the female leader as the mother. She's Auntie Cindy, reminds us of Angela Mutti Merkel. And in the Twitter threads on leader and gender, this biological model of leadership as a form of mothering emerges quite frequently. But as political commentator Emma Burnell has observed, women and men may be socialised to have different leadership styles, but that doesn't mean that women are magical maternal creatures ready to heal the world with all the PPE they keep in their special lady places. The truth is that these women are also steely and determined politicians who had the ambition and drive to get to the top of their professions. The other truth is that they did so in countries where their sex didn't ultimately stop them from doing so. However, it's not just her maternal qualities for which Arden is being praised. A range of international media focus on her strength of resolve, her clarity of communication, and her willingness to consult experts and work collectively. The Atlantic, American publication, observes that her approach isn't just resonating with her people on an emotional level, but that her willingness to address hardships honestly and to acknowledge difficulties rather than spin successes have been a key to her success in taking New Zealand's population with her. Furthermore, her frequent online presence runs against accepted political wisdom. For example, Instagram's guidelines and the Female Leads Disrupt Your Feed campaign that recommends that women leaders limit their social media activity because of the amount of hassle and negative coverage they get. However, during the pandemic, Arden has been lauded for using Facebook as a key way for remaining present and in communication, in contrast with the frequent sort of "Where's Boris?" hashtag question. We can see a clear contrast in their use of social and traditional media. The announcements of lockdown by Arden on the 23rd of March, she had a prepared speech, but it was broadcast live, followed by extensive time for media questions. In contrast, Boris Johnson pre-recorded his March the 24th announcement and offered no chance for questions. Arden's recognition of the value of social media in maintaining relationships in a pandemic has been particularly prescient. When you're virtually in touch with those close to you, and that's the only way in which you see them, the Prime Minister on your Facebook page appears as one of those people too. Furthermore, it suggests the kind of agility in the face of reactionary forces that young women are increasingly demonstrating online. Whereas post-feminist young women's presence online has been described as predominantly entrepreneurial and individualistic, producing the self as a brand, the upcoming generation of feminists recognise the power of authenticity, for example, in Me Too and Say Her Name campaigns, and crucially of collectivism. This is brilliantly demonstrated in the success of young K-pop fans in the spoiling of the White Lives Matter hashtag, and recently their takeover of the narrative surrounding a Trump rally through the mass booking of fake places. The point isn't that 7,000 genuine places were indeed booked. It's that they recognise the strategies of overblown claims and boasts of 1 million tickets, and were able to contrast these with pictures of half-empty stadium. So while scholars have observed the ways in which neoliberal feminism individualises the struggle for equality and advancement, and ways in which online spaces increasingly make girls' private lives available for public consumption, both Arden's Facebook addresses and pop fans' takeovers can be seen as potentially challenging this trend by repoliticising personal media and collectively dominating public narratives. Hannah.
Thank you. Can you remove your slides and I'll add mine?
Yep.
Great. Actually, I'll add mine in a moment. Okay, so in this period of pandemic, our leaders' performances of masculinity have also been essentialised, polarised and exaggerated. The pandemic has been framed, as Michele said, as an imaginary war, an invocation which creates space for macho posturing from our leaders, whether that's Johnson's Churchillian mimicry, President Donald Trump's call upon his citizens to bear arms and resist lockdowns imposed at a state level, or Brazil's right-wing President Bolsonaro's promise, we are going to tackle the virus, but tackle it like fucking men. Trump just described himself as a wartime president fighting an invisible enemy. Johnson similarly positioned himself as leading a wartime government, stating of coronavirus, this enemy can be deadly. And I'll share some of these discourses in a slide with you now. So this braggadocio frames, what's that? Can you see? Can you see the slides?
Oh, we can now, yes. Sorry.
Okay. This braggadocio frames a crisis of public health as something that can be managed through masculine aggression and violence, rather than, say, a politics of care, which centres the well-being of citizens. In his performative bravado about deliberately shaking hands with COVID-19 patients on ward visits, his appeals to British common sense, Johnson positions those exercising caution, as the World Health Organization advised, as excessively fearful. Headlines depict those calling for stricter measures as in the grips of COVID hysteria, a term which locates an inappropriately excessive and emotional response, specifically within the female or feminized body. So to tackle COVID like a fucking man, it seems requires a coalescence of misogyny, a celebration of masculine power, nationalism, and the anti-intellectualism of a nation that has had enough of experts, to borrow a phrase used by Brexit Michael Gove when challenged for importing Trump's post-truth politics in his misleading Brexit campaign. So these particular coalescing themes also typify the rise of populist authoritarianism. Of course, Johnson, despite his performance of masculine invincibility and his disavowal of vulnerability, did get ill. And despite extending this conception of virility onto the national body, and as Armanand argues, avoiding the appearance of vulnerability by denying the threat until it became impossible to dismiss, the UK's frailty was also similarly exposed. Scientists, of course, now estimate that the UK death toll would have been halved had lockdowns started sooner. And surveys by Caparo and Barcello found that despite the fact that men are more likely to die of coronavirus, men are less likely to wear masks, believing it to be a, quote, sign of weakness. Ideas about masculinity, therefore, can be seen to structure actions on national and individual levels. Launching their report titled Towards a Feminist Foreign Policy in the United States, the International Center for Research on Women points out that a knee-jerk, militarized approach to foreign policy problems has left us ill-equipped to tackle today's most urgent crises, the coronavirus pandemic, climate change, and the rise of authoritarianism. In their games of chicken, apoplectic fits of anger, outbursts about doing things like fucking men, or liberating Virginia, or resorting to shouting, that's not true, when confronted with facts during Prime Minister's questions about care home deaths. These male leaders prove emotional and irrational compared to Merkel and Arden's measured, technocratic, expert-favouring approaches. So when disparaging other male leaders, Johnson has frequently resorted to misogynist language, calling the opposition leader, the then opposition leader, Jeremy Corbyn, a big girl's blouse for demanding Johnson publish details of the government's no-deal Brexit planning documents. His predecessor, David Cameron, a girly swat, for having increased MP's presence over the summer when Johnson planned to close Parliament for 5 weeks to squash resistance to his no-deal Brexit plans. Under COVID, this sexist, homophobic, feminising logic has been directed towards Labour leader Keir Starmer. As Starmer has used his legal background to give Johnson a fact-led grilling in Prime Minister's questions, this has been reported in the media through the sexist, feminising stock character of the girly swat. In The Spectator, journalist Lloyd Evans reports, it has come down to a classroom contest. The SWAT versus the WAG, the smart aleck against the rugger captain, the chemistry nerd who wants to join the cool kids behind the bike sheds. Similarly, Guardian columnist John Crace reports, preparation is for girly SWATs. Johnson is the macho blagger who has always been able to wing it, fueled by a few gags and some hasty last-minute revision. In this framing, masculinity makes a virtue of incompetent leadership, again hinging upon the particular combination of populist, anti-expert misogyny. As I've argued elsewhere, anti-intellectual and anti-feminist rhetoric coalesce, demonstrating intersections between misogyny and the far right, and suggesting a gendering of the fascism-progressivism divide in attempting to emasculate people for being progressive. And you could see the snowflake discourse as a really commonly circulated example of this. Now I'm going to talk about some of the responses or a particular trend in a certain kind of response that we've seen to this this kind of masculinity in leadership. So in response to the backdrop of performative masculinity, a new media form has emerged. As production has halted on professional programme making, and many are at home more with more time to fill, not all of course, as we were discussing before this started, but for many. As a result, user-generated content has emerged as a key media form of lockdown. Instead of going to pubs or clubs, Britons, especially young Britons, are staying in and spending time on TikTok. I'm going to show you what TikTok looks like in the slide now. Apologies for the migraine that this might give you. So TikTok is a social media app where users film themselves dancing, pranking, and lip syncing in karaoke style short videos. Can you see that slide okay? And let me know if you can't. So 1 in 3 Britons, that's 24 million people, has the TikTok app. And the week of the 23rd of March, when lockdown was enforced, UK installations of the app surged by 34%. The other media form of lockdown is the theatre of the national briefing from our leaders. Under pandemic, we've had to tune in daily at 5 p.m. to find out what we're allowed to do. So you have these two media forms, with the boom of TikTok coinciding with people's days being punctuated by these briefings. Now, as the invented war against coronavirus has enabled our leaders' performative masculinity to become increasingly caricatured, a number of women have responded to this with their own performances, skewering toxic masculinity through TikTok. In the videos, the audio comes from clips of male leaders delivering their COVID-19 briefings. The video, however, is user-generated, with women carefully delivering a precise lip sync and an uncanny impersonation, combining politics and comedy in a kind of wry gallows humour. Political briefings become bedtime stories in the case of Boris Johnson, or the drunken ramblings in the club in the case of Donald Trump. Kylie Scott lip syncing over audio of Trump's ruminations on the virus, about how the jam has gotten so clever, and she observes that she realized that he sounded drunk and performed his audio, not her, she's not saying anything, it's his audio, and she is behaving around it, miming that it's the drunken ramblings of someone. And within all of these videos, we know the voice well. Chances are we even saw the specific clip in question, but it's now recontextualized in the recombinance of audiovisual elements and playful bricolage that typifies the way that digital spaces have long been understood as spaces of exploration, identity work, and counterculture. One might call it parody or satire, but there has been no rewriting. In a world where the charge of fake news is used by leaders such as Trump as a defense against critique, this form of undermining impersonation lets the absurdity of our male leaders speak for itself. The charges are undeniable, as these women are using what is already out there on record, allowing male leaders to stitch themselves up with their own words. Limited to non-verbal communication, punctuating speeches with mime, reaction, and breaks to the fourth wall, these short videos highlight the absurdity of leaders' statements just by repeating them. A part of what renders these videos so potent and the words within them so absurd is the removal of the signs and codes of masculine power and legitimacy that form the visual lexicon of the state briefing. Gone are the imposing buildings, formal lecterns, and gilded crests for the feminized space of the home. Gone are the solemn aids in the background, usually male aids as well, for the claustrophobic enclosure of social isolation with a mobile phone app for company. Gone is the uniform of masculine officialdom, the suit and tie, or in the case of British TikToker Maggie Foster, it's comically oversized, highlighting the borrowed role that poorly fits her youthful femininity, a microcosm of the wider message about who utters these words and holds these positions of power. Another part of the pleasure in these videos derives from the knowledge that these men are misogynists and racists, I don't need to remind you of Trump's grab them by the pussy comments, or Johnson's newspaper column comparing veiled Muslim women to letterboxes. And it's a pleasure, firstly, to see them being bettered by women, and in the case of Sarah Cooper's impersonations of Trump, that's her in the middle there, climbing into the bath, a woman of colour. And secondly, to know that this would be all the more annoying to Trump or Johnson precisely because of their racist misogyny. So I'll just end by saying that lip syncing has a long queer history. I don't know if anyone watches RuPaul's Drag Race, but this would be the most mainstream iteration of the form at the moment. And these videos open up a queer space of female masculinity, of female to male impersonation, which highlights the performativity and fabrication inherent in our daily gendered codes of power and legitimacy. In a moment of carnivalesque inversion, they reveal the absurdity and incompetence of those wielding power through this time of global crisis. And I will hand it back to Michele to connect this to our findings from talking to girls about their ideas of leadership.
Okay, thanks, Hannah. I am now trying to, sorry. Share, you'll be relieved to know there's only one slide to go. Can you all see that? Okay, so moving on from these representations of toxic masculinity and the carnivalesque, one of the things I want to say that I haven't got lots of quotes on is that girls' awareness of the problematic nature of leadership, of cultures of leadership, of discourses surrounding them as being extremely problematic at best for women was very strong. And I'm not concentrating on them in particular because there's too much to say. What I am going to offer, or what we can see in the slide here, are discuss three particular things which resonate with the qualities that are being drawn on and praised in the women leaders we've talked about. First of all is the girls' suspicion of heroic individual leadership models and of the desire for power for its own sake. Secondly, their preference for collective modes of decision making. And thirdly, their desire for expertise and experience in terms of developing their own ideas or their own potential. So collectivism and consultation were not only perceived as a strategy for risk mitigation, particularly for women who girls felt women were very particularly exposed as individuals in the public eye, but actually for better outcomes. You can see on the slide that Chloe says that a group of people believing the same thing will lead to better outcomes. Whereas Maya talks about actually if you share the risk, if you're taking a big and important decision with an unknown outcome, it means you're not carrying that load just as an individual. It was for them too an ethical issue, a way of ensuring inclusion and representativeness, not just about being nicer, but about making sure that all politics and all decision making is more representative. Eva and Chloe thought that listening would make people feel accepted, and that was crucial in achieving consensus. And what we can see in play here are indeed some wider gender tropes of femininity, and particularly women's leadership is more caring and connected, as in the Lehman Sisters. But I think the girls politicise these qualities in terms of thinking about how they might bring about change more effectively, as well as in a more kind of ethical and caring manner. There's a very interesting level of self-awareness of the temptations of power. Toya, for example, feeling that if she were Prime Minister and her friends tried to take advantage of it, she'd say, yeah, okay, I'll do that, I'll go along with you. And most importantly, girls saw collective leadership as providing a buffer against the pressure and exposure faced by individual leaders. Finally, Cadence, who one of the leaders there, was talking about the need for going into the world, making a change, but having it as something that you are competent to do, that you consult other people on, that the idea that you might go and take on something like a decision-making role without really having done the homework, without having been, if you like, a girly swat, was for her kind of unthinkable and dangerous. So both the wider media coverage of women's leadership during the pandemic and the mobilisation of online collective activity may begin to provide some kind of hope in the face of ongoing hostility. One of our favourite quotations was from a participant we call Serena, saying, these things don't make me think I wouldn't want to be in charge, but they do make me think I don't want to be known for it. It's the idea of having responsibility was attractive, but the idea of being in the public eye, definitely not. And here we see set against the individualism of aspiration, which is, you know, a very well observed feature, core feature of neoliberal political cultures, and suggests that actually they're more invested in the kind of collective public discourse, which has largely disappeared until very recently from politics. It's identifiable, however, in the kinds of public discourse promoted by Arden and in the resistant activisms and campaigns of which girls were at the forefront during the COVID pandemic. Furthermore, it suggests that girls, as Arden has with Facebook and the K-pop fans, a kind of agility in the face of reactionary forces that young women are increasingly facing online. So while, as I said, the post-feminist presence online is predominantly individualistic, what these girls are doing are creating spaces and offering responses and wanting to find out how you make things better as a group. So I think I'm going to leave that there. I've got a couple